In 1866, when DePauw was known as Indiana Asbury, and about 11 years before this drawing was created of the Wabash campus, the two institutions battled for the first time on the baseball field. When it comes to football, history books suggest DePauw played Butler in 1880 and lost. A brief account in Asbury Monthly described it as a disastrous defeat. In 1884, DePauw and Wabash each played one game against Butler, with Wabash winning and DePauw losing. The DePauw squad was so forlorn it took out an ad in the student newspaper offering to sell its football on the cheap. It would be 1889 before DePauw would play another official game. This is the team photo from that year, while their soon-to-be rivals played 3 games in 1886, 1 in 87, and like DePauw, 2 in 89. This is an illustration of the Greencastle campus in 1890. Even before the first snap in this series, on Greencastle street corners there was late 19th century trash talk. DePauw's record asked, "Is there a college in this state by the name of Wabash, and has it a football team?" The first scoring came when DePauw forced a Wabash safety. DePauw halfback John Miner scored the series' first ever touchdown, and the final score on a beautiful day was 34-5 in favor of the visitors. The class that would graduate in the spring of 1891 returned to the Greencastle campus for their reunion 30 years later as the first to ever witness a DePauw-Wabash football scrape. Installation of a new underwater cable in 1891 allowed the first telephone conversations between London and Paris. The first traveler's checks were issued, and 43% of DePauw's students were women. Legendary DePauw professor Joseph P. Naylor joined the Department of Physics in 1891, while the campus newspaper reported a photographer named Kerr had taken a great shot of the football team. But these men would not have a face-to-face meeting with the squad from Wabash. The gripe from Greencastle was that one of the Wabash players was not a student at the college. On November 20th, the day before the scheduled game, the manager of the Crimson team sent a telegram south announcing that his group could not play and would forfeit the contest. But there would be other things to see. Days later in Springfield, Massachusetts, James Naismith took a soccer ball and a peach basket into a gym and invented the game of basketball. Early newspaper reports typically listed the heavier team as favorites heading into a football game, and the DePauw men, averaging 180 pounds each, were given the edge in 1892. For the record, this guy, right tackle Jerry Simpson, tipped the scales at 168. The game must have been a big deal. DePauw's Philadelphian Literary Society postponed its meeting on account of it. A train carrying the Wabash team and about 30 other students from the college arrived in Greencastle at 2:20 p.m., and the kickoff took place an hour and 10 minutes later. Where on campus it was played is a mystery. A report says there was a decided slope on the grounds to the north goal. It was all downhill for Wabash after their rivals scored early and often in a 42-4 run. Photographs allow us to take a trip back in time to a DePauw laboratory and to peek at the cover of an 1893 syllabus for the course Economics, Money, and Banking. This is the DePauw team that made the trip to Crawfordsville for the 4th edition of this nascent rivalry. The morning of the contest, Wabash students and faculty built a fence around Philistine Field in hopes of boosting attendance. It worked. 200 DePauw fans bought tickets that afternoon. When he wasn't posing with a bale of hay, DePauw captain Arthur Whitcomb was a force. He scored at least 2 touchdowns and kicked 8 extra points in the 1893 game. Other touchdowns were registered by his equally dapper teammates E.W. Albright and Jack Kuykendall. The visitors led 36-22 at the half, and each team scored 12 points in the second stanza. A boastful DePauw newspaper summary of the game likened Wabash to a defeated campaign rooster and suggested that the Crawfordsville mayor knew he was safe when he told the Wabash team before the game, "Boys, if you win, you can have the city." In cities and towns across America, indignation toward the game of football was growing in 1894. Fistfights, free-for-alls, non-students playing for colleges, and a number of deaths on playing fields led some schools to scrap their teams, and the dangerous formation known as the flying wedge was outlawed. DePauw's student journalists added to the debate. A front-page item in the January 23rd DePauw Weekly examined the sport's future and asked, "Has football dug its grave?" By fall, the patient was still up and around. Here's a look at the 1894 Wabash team. And this is a stunning shot from the DePauw Rose Poly game played in November. It's not clear where at DePauw the contest with Wabash was played. Photos from the era suggest East College Lawn may have been a venue. For the first time in 5 meetings, the men from Crawfordsville would prevail, led by hard-hitting fullback John Fry, the captain of the Scarlet team. DePauw had a School of Military Science and Tactics in 1895. Its activities included firing cannons on East College Lawn. The university opened its own athletic facility, McKean Field, that year. This shows the baseball team at play there. And this image depicts the candidates for the track team. The yearbook lists 16 players on the football team's roster, but the squad was no match for Wabash, led by fullback Albert Babe Ristine and the eventual state champion. 500 fans witnessed a 6-0 victory for the footballers from Crawfordsville. A week later, DePauw lost to Missouri, then went on to beat and tie Indiana University in consecutive contests. The Wabash College Athletic Association, which was run by students, was in debt, and the football team played only 5 games in 1896, winning just 1. The DePauw team, seen here, had an early and rough scrape with an athletic club from Louisville, which turned out to be a group of, according to one account, hardened professionals. A story in DePauw's student newspaper was headlined, "Rotten." It reported that a Louisville player pulled a gun during the scrimmage and relayed a final score of 26 points for cigarettes, brute force, and foul play against 12 for science, self-control, and manhood. 3 weeks later, the women of DePauw's Alpha Chi Omega chapter were among those gathered for the game with Wabash. The editors of the DePauw Weekly predicted the Tigers would shut out their rivals, and they were spot on. A veteran DePauw team logged a 20-0 victory. In 1897, William McKinley was inaugurated as America's 25th president, and the first Boston Marathon was run. 1898 saw the sale of the first auto insurance policy in the U.S., and an automobile speed record of 39 miles per hour was set. Among the items patented in 1899 were the rubber heel, aspirin, and the lawnmower. But the DePauw-Wabash football rivalry sat dormant during those 3 years. As a new century dawned, this is a look at the First National Bank of Greencastle in 1900. The two schools made up for lost time by scheduling a pair of games, and the series' first prankster emerged. A week prior to the first Wabash-DePauw game, a man came to Greencastle claiming to be an Indianapolis newspaper reporter. He got permission to sit on the Tiger bench on game day to ensure his write-up would be comprehensive. Some journalist this guy turned out to be. He was Wabash head coach Anthony Shez. The very next week, in a game played not far from this Wabash classroom, the home team's scouting paid off with a 6-0 victory. Wabash scored its touchdown 3 minutes before the game was over. 5 weeks later at DePauw, a different outcome. The Tigers prevailed 26-11 in a game that was called on account of darkness 12 minutes into the second half. Shez would sit on the DePauw bench the entire next season. He left Wabash to coach their rivals before the 1901 campaign began. On October 12, 1901, what had been known as the Executive Mansion got a new moniker, as President Theodore Roosevelt renamed this place the White House. As the weather turned chillier in Greencastle, a local merchant launched a $7 overcoat sale. Like the season before, the two teams played 2 games in 1901. This is the Wabash team photo. They took place on consecutive Mondays, with the first at DePauw's McKean Field. The Greencastle banner wrote a song to get DePauw fans worked up. Sung to the tune of Marching Through Georgia, it began, "Come ye men of DPU, assemble on McKean. 'Twill be the very toughest game Wabash has ever seen." They were seemingly prophetic words, as a strong running game gave the Tigers 2 victories. And Greencastle had a third reason to celebrate that fall, as word arrived that free mail delivery would soon begin in the city. DePauw fans had bragging rights headed into the 1902 game and were begging for more, but there would be no contest with Wabash that fall. A year later, when the two teams renewed their growing rivalry in Crawfordsville, classrooms emptied and the library had plenty of free seats. Tiger coach Chauncey Berrien and his team were 2-5-1 entering the final game, having been drubbed by Indiana 70-0 the week before. Coach Tug Wilson and his Wabash squad were 8-2 against opponents, which included 2 high school teams. And the men in scarlet schooled their rivals from DePauw in the 1903 clash, 10-0. Wabash ended its season the following weekend with a 34-0 loss to Notre Dame. On November 4th, 1904, Harvard Stadium, the first facility built specifically for football, opened. 5 days later, courtesy of the Wright brothers, came the first airplane flight to last more than 5 minutes. The '04 Wabash football team was the first to be known as Little Giants. Coach Francis Caillou commented that his scrappy team was made up of good little men. That became Little Giants in newspaper reports. Here's a look at the DePauw team in a year in which there would be no rivalry game. After much back and forth, the two teams could not agree on a date for a contest and finally gave up the talks just before Thanksgiving weekend. The 1905 DePauw team was led by Fred Tucker, the subject of this flattering yearbook cartoon, and the Tigers had a new coach, O.H. Luck. But the team's luck wasn't very good when they faced off against Wabash in late November. The Giants were huge, racking up 577 yards of offense to their opponent's 198, winning in a romp. Symbols of Greencastle, the town square and East College are familiar sights as we look back upon 1906. Although classrooms had a different look then, vintage photos also show the university's Physics Club, Fencing Society, Oratorical Association, and Preachers Club. Prayers couldn't hurt the football team. DePauw opened its 1906 season by thumping Franklin, this is a shot from that game, 81-6, but went on to lose by a combined 88-0 to Michigan State and Indiana. Wabash sold a big bunch of tickets to the rivalry game at its chapel before that Saturday, and at least 75 rooters paid $1 apiece to ride the Monon to Greencastle. The Little Giants had beaten Purdue, and pundits were prognosticating that the Wabash offense would rack up as many as 50 points against DePauw. But wet, miserable conditions made this a defensive struggle. We're looking at a photo from the 1906 game. Charles Jewett, who would later become mayor of Indianapolis, was disqualified for unnecessary roughness, and even All-American honorable mention Fred Tucker couldn't save the day as the Tigers walked off McKean Field with another loss.
Happy New Year!
1907 began with a new world record. On January 1st, President Theodore Roosevelt shook 8,513 hands in one day. On October 22nd of that year, Ringling Brothers, boasting the greatest show on earth, bought the Barnum and Bailey Circus. About 2.5 weeks later, another edition of small college football's big show came to Crawfordsville. The 225 DePauw fans who made the trip arrived chanting "Wahoo, Wahoo, Rip, Zip, Bazoo" as they marched 4 abreast to Ingalls Field. Wabash scored a touchdown, 2 drop kicks, and a safety to claim an 11-4 victory. The Tigers may have surprised the favored Little Giants with a close game, but they still went home with a loss. As the fall of 1908 arrived, West College and the other buildings on the DePauw campus welcomed a new addition. Greencastle's Andrew Carnegie Library was dedicated in October, something students likely wrote home about on this vintage postcard. The Tigers were 4-2 heading into their last game of the season with Wabash. The Little Giants, with new head coach Ralph Jones, who had been successfully leading the basketball program, were 1-5, coming off an 8-4 loss to Notre Dame. On a Friday in November, 350 DePauw students made the train trip to Crawfordsville, where the total crowd was estimated at 1,000. This is a photo from the 1908 game. It was scoreless until the second half, when a pair of touchdowns by Wabash's James Herc, short for Hercules, Steers, determined the outcome. A 12-0 victory for the home team. This panoramic photo from 1909 gives us a glimpse of the Wabash College campus in another era. It was a year when the football team got off to a 2-3 start before the game with its rivals to the south. A Wabash graduate became the new grid coach and helped reshape the game. Jesse Harper was an early proponent of the forward pass. A DePauw team boasting names such as Hop Overman, Kinks Hawthorne, and Warhorse Sellers had only played one game, a 28-5 loss to Indiana before the rivalry contest. 3 days before kickoff, the DePauw student newspaper chastised a Crawfordsville columnist for his pipe dream after predicting a 60-0 Little Giants win. In a battle waged just a few blocks from bustling Washington Street, this DePauw team held tough and proved the columnist's optimism wrong. When it was over, the DePauw paper went so far as to characterize the scoreless outcome as a Tiger victory.